What? We just do it. It'll turn out okay.
Yeah.
Everyone, welcome to Talk Time with Caffeine, the only podcast where we drink caffeine or whatever, and we talk about whatever the hell we talk about.
Yeah, this cup doesn't have caffeine in it. Sorry, guys.
This has caffeine. It's iced tea.
You're doing straight alcohol or something?
I didn't say it had alcohol. I just said it didn't have caffeine. Come on. My goodness.
Lately, I've been listening to a lot of debates with YECs, and it seems like for a few times maybe they pretty much say the same thing. So I was just wondering about where do they all come from? Because as I mentioned with as me and RJ talked about in our talking about synapsids back in the day. Even Owen, who hated Darwin evolution, was an OEC. So
yeah.
So when did they start that transition?
Ellen G. White is the name that you want to look at there. So in case people don't know,
the 20th century.
Yeah, Ellen G. White, it's 20th century. And this is a period when there's a lot of sort of like revivalist sort of new movements popping up. The Jehovah's Witnesses start popping up around this time. The Mormons had already popped up, but it wasn't that long before. And now Ellen G. White comes along, and she's another one of these new sort of Christian-y prophets. And she creates the Seventh-day Adventists, and there are two big distinctives from most other Christians, at the time at least. Or I guess there are three big distinctions. One is they accepted that Ellen G. White was a prophet, which no one else does by definition. They also accepted that the proper day for Christian worship and Sabbath was Saturday and not Sunday. So Seventh-day Adventists are called that, right? Because they go to church on Saturday, and they're pretty strict with not doing work or even a lot of different play things. Like they don't usually play sports on Saturday. But then that last really big distinctive it's no longer a distinctive, but it was at the time, was they were very insistent on taking things like Bishop Ussher's estimates and the sort of genealogical estimates that you can come up with for the age of the earth from the Bible very seriously, when that had basically been previously unheard of. Basically every Christian, with very few exceptions, by that time was perfectly okay with the earth being many millions of years old, although at the time, we didn't have radiometric dating and whatnot, so it wasn't clear exactly how old. And people were thinking, like RJ had said a little bit before when we were off air, like maybe 50 million years or 100 million years, which was a reasonable guess at the time, right? It's not to knock people because
Lord
they didn't.
Kelvin had the science behind that. He was just doing it by Earth cooling calculations. So everybody scientifically could accept tens of millions of years as a ballpark.
Right. I mean, we know now that was incorrect, but that was just because of lack of data. It wasn't because they were dumb.
Yeah.
But so, but
and then on top of which, go ahead, Dapper.
So Ellen G. White was really the genesis of an insistence that the Earth be young, and that the chronologies that you can derive from these, honestly, quite fanciful genealogies should be taken very seriously. And but
not only that, she had a dream. An angel came down and showed her the flood. She watched it like a big movie, and that all the world's geology was formed from that, and that's what got her going. So she had it right there in CinemaScope.
Yeah, it's an odd thing, but then the thing is that at this time, fundamentalism as a movement hadn't really begun to exist. There might be things that we would today describe as fundamentalists, but you got to remember that the word fundamentalist actually comes from the self-description of a group of Christians from the early 20th century, a bit later than her.
Yeah, it was the same context. If you're familiar with the Scopes trial that came to a head in 1925, that subculture is coming out of that big fundamentalist revival that was really kicking in the early 20th century.
And they sort of imported some of this excessive biblical literalism that Ellen G. White had insisted on. And because the Seventh-day Adventists were the only ones who were really teaching like real biblical literalism in this area, it was the only source that these fundamentalists had to draw upon, which is also why non-Seventh-day Adventists, young Earth creationists, are very loath to admit their ties to the theology of Ellen G. White. They do not like to admit it.
Yeah,
they like to pretend.
if you read, I've noted it in the books that I've written, is that the ICR has gone out of its way, that Henry Morris founded, has gone out of its way to deny that there was a connection between Ellen White's flood geology and their flood geology, that was where he got it from. But they're just wrong. If anybody wants a way more detailed history of this than you would ever want to get otherwise, Ronald Numbers' classic The Creationist book, which was, I think, in the 1990s, and then there was a reissue of it with some modifications, I think, in the early 21st century. That one is still just a super duper classic, going in where every possible person that was involved in the creationist movement from basically the 1880s on into the 1960s and 70s is covered in there. So it's just a go-to resource everybody needs to have.
So what's the
And
scope?
even to this,
So what's the Scopes trial? The first major debate with YACs?
Well, one thing is,
young Earth creationists weren't playing a part in that at all. That it was a generic anti-evolutionism, and technically speaking, William Jennings Bryan was an old Earth creationist. Although, whenever William Jennings Bryan was quizzed on it at the trial on chronology, he really was still thinking in that 6,000 year-ish frame, and that's the seed corn that modern creationists have built off of. That back in the 17th century, when Bishop Ussher, and not just Bishop Ussher, a whole bunch of people, when they were getting all sciencey, were trying to figure, well, can we figure out how old the Earth is? We know it was made for Adam, and Adam's had kids, and the kids had kids, and the kids had kids, and you can total up the ages and come out with a ballpark figure of 7,000 years-ish. So that's where those numbers started to come in the 17th century. The young Earth creationists, ironically, the Seventh-day Adventist pseudogeologist, George McCready Price, was almost called as a science witness for the creationist side at the Scopes trial, and then they backed out of it at the last minute and then decided to put no witnesses at all. So all the evolutionists that were waiting, chomping at the bits to present their evidence at the trial didn't get presented at all. And so it turned into a verbal fist fight between William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow. But although the creationists today want to give the impression that young Earth creationism was a dominant and going concern back prior to the 1960s, nope, it wasn't. It was a tiny fringe thing that once Henry Morris and company came in the 1960s, they decided they were Baptists, so they got rid of all of that Seventh-day Adventist Association. And by the way, the Adventists haven't gone away. Often you'll find people that would be writing in creationist journals, you'll see that they are a scientist with a PhD from Loma Linda University. Well, that's a Seventh-day Adventist university. And to this day, they still pop up.
But one thing is, when they pop up in creationist journals or media, very rarely is it mentioned that they work for Loma Linda. For instance, in the Is Genesis History movie, Dr. Arthur Chadwick features fairly prominently in one section. And actually, I called him on the phone not that long ago. He was polite. I'll give him that. He's also a fraud. But either way, no attention was drawn to the fact that he worked for a Seventh-day Adventist creationist university.
This is
like that was glossed right over.
This is a common element of hide the ball. You find it pathologically over in the intelligent design camp, where the young Earth creationists that are in their group, you never see them identified as such. So Paul Nelson and John Mark Reynolds popping up there, and you find Salvador Cordova percolating into the field. You find them cooperating more and more with John Sanford and that come from the direct young Earth creationist community. So there's a great deal about it. At least you get a bit more overt labeling of things when you look at the old Earth creationists they're very fussy about not associating themselves with the young Earth creationists, but the intelligent designers don't give a rat's ass on it. Once you get into the 1960s, you see creationism and the kinds of debates that we're going to be talking about in the rest of the show starting to emerge. And the great personage here is Duane Gish, who was the most ferociously powerful defender of the creationist paleontology worldview.
And that's where we get
that you can never find.
That's where we get the thing from everyone uses still, the Gish Gallop thing.
Gish Gallop.
Yeah. Yeah, the Gish Gallop is named for Dwayne T. Gish. And the idea is, okay, it is trivially easy to spout nonsense claim after nonsense claim. However, in order to adequately explain why any given nonsense claim is ridiculous, it's going to take, obviously, at least a little bit longer than it takes to say the claim. So Dwayne Gish's debate tactic, by all reports, although we don't have a lot of records of exactly what was said in his debates, was that he would simply get up, say so much nonsense that no debater could ever hope to counter all of it, and then anything they didn't get around to, Gish would just say that he would essentially imply that they had, just conceded on those points, even though.
Yeah, and one of the problems we have as scholars today is that very few of Dwayne Gish's actual appearances in debates were recorded in any way, let alone where you could watch them on YouTube. Even some of the debates, I think the ones he did with Ken Miller, for example, you don't even have transcripts of these things available to know exactly what went on. You only have little side comments and stuff.
Yeah,
that made it awkward.
So because of the at least with professional debates, you only have so long. You have so long to debunk or whatever, or rebuttal stuff. Like 10
and I think they
something.
tended to have, if memory serves me, the debate formats that Gish was fond of would be to have about 20 minutes or 30 minutes to just run amok on their presentation statements, not 10 or 12 like we're getting on some of the debates that you see us do today. But we have a faster sensibility on here. Where one of the things that classifies Gish as a disreputable character from a scholarly point of view came up with the people who would be following Gish around to record what he did in a debate and then another debate and another debate. Because it would often be the case that somebody would challenge him on a fact and he would seemingly back down. He would seemingly admit that there was a problem with the fact he had just claimed and that it wasn't a fact at all. And he would say, I won't repeat that again. And then he would go to the next debate and repeat it again. And it was that's where you move from just being wrong, but you're correctable, to being wrong and disreputable because you're just repeating the same material over and over again.
The law. I'm not hearing this.
We see that in current creationism. A few glaring examples that would come to mind would be Kent Hovind has been corrected and admitted fault on certain aspects numerous times, and does not ever bother to change. And then will simply say, "Well, I don't have to change if I'm not right." And it's like, okay, but you admitted you were wrong. Yeah. So another example might be
Ken Hovind is distilled Dwayne Gish, all of the worst features of Dwayne Gish on steroids.
Mm-hmm. Another example might be, say, and this is less in a debate realm, but not that long ago, Standing for Truth admitted that my arguments in favor of birds nesting, at least taxonomically, within Dinosauria, were in fact reasonable, and that he had concluded that yes, birds must be dinosaurs, at least in the taxonomic sense. Which I was like, okay, that's fair. But then he had Jonathan Sarfati on, and Sarfati said things that I know that Standing for Truth knows are wrong. And did Standing for Truth give any pushback or correction to any of these things? No. Just laughed about how ridiculous the quote-unquote evolutionists are. So he's completely backtracked on that.
Kent Hovind is a great figure in here because he is the next stage of creationism. Unlike Dwayne Gish, that operated from the quasi-scholarly side of serious creationism, Kent Hovind is a bottom-feeder doofus, but he was far more prolific. So his lectures and videos, and he was entering into that video market where, as Dapper mentioned earlier, he's giving his stuff away. This copyright free. He wants people to see it. So he is slipping into that public marketplace on a scale that Dwayne Gish never did. And that's why in the real world, I bump into people who have become creationists because they're watching Dr. Kent Hovind videos way more than it's because they've read some Dwayne Gish book.
Speaking of doctor, was Dwayne Gish? How was he? Was he like did he claim to be a doctor or anything like that? Or
he had an actual biochemistry degree.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he actually was.
He had a real live PhD. It's kind of funky, the ones that have that, because Gish is a biochemist, Michael Denton is a biochemist, Michael Behe is a biochemist. Are you getting a pattern here? That's the kind of ones that are just used to looking at chemicals interacting as chemicals, not necessarily how they're integrating in a biological frame. And
Also,
I think that kind of mindset that's just looking at the chemical bonds and forgetting how the biology connects up makes it easier for them to be an anti-evolutionist.
So, Creo Debunk asked, do we know about Walter, I think is Veith? And I am not familiar with his work. I don't know about RJ. I imagine RJ probably is, because RJ knows everything.
He's one of the little fringe creationists. I think he's from Germany, if memory serves me. And there's a small but burgeoning creationism movement in Europe and South Korea, and a few other places. There's kind of an intelligent design bunch coming up in Brazil.
Don't tell me about South Korea. I like my trips to South Korea. I don't want them tarnished by the idea that there are YECs running around.
They all travel through the evangelical support network. So the creationists will then go and visit the fellow believers in the new country and spread the material. Plus, the stuff is available increasingly online, so people can get it that direction.
All right. Well, I'm still going to enjoy myself some kimchi whenever I can, so that's not going to ruin it for me. But it does make me sad.
Question from Eric, the Tyrannoceratops. What got him interested in the creation versus evolution debate? I described it a bit in my writings at the TIP project at www.tortugan.wordpress.com. That I had a long abiding interest in dinosaurs, and that had estivated for years from when I was just a kid, and all through the 60s and 70s, I kind of lost track of it. And then in the 1980s, as you found the new upsurge in dinosaurs and scale model dinosaurs and all of that, I really got into it with a vengeance at exactly the time that the young Earth creationists were putting up their equal time rules and trying to tell me that there were dinosaurs on Noah's Ark. So that's when I got involved with it, because I'm going, no, I don't think so. and my interest in that then never stopped. The intelligent design movement, as it happened, some of the big poobahs of that were in Spokane, Steve Meyer at Whitworth College at the time. And so I gradually discovered more and more of what was going on and started researching this stuff by the late 1990s in considerable depth. And that's when I thought, yeah, I'm kind of into this. I'm going to keep at it. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Speaking of that, is that Noah's Ark thing a new thing? Because I think before maybe they were like, oh, they died in the flood, but now they're saying that they were on the Ark and died after the flood.
That was a logical. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Deborah.
I was going to say, so it's gone in a few different directions. You can still find a few people out there who think that dinosaurs are just the devil's trick. I do believe that most of the whole dinosaurs are a hoax by paleontologists. I think that's pretty much just pose. I don't think really too many people legitimately believe that.
There's no clarity of it anywhere across the boundary of anti-evolution.
Yeah, you can also still find people who say that dinosaurs just didn't get on the Ark and they all died in the flood because they just didn't get on. But I think that the most recent is the current idea that Kent Hovind and Ken Ham are pushing, which is that they were on the Ark and they just didn't survive to modern times, or maybe they did in a few isolated areas, but not by and large.
Because they taste delicious. Also.
Well, I honestly think that the biggest reason that they say this is because it's fun to think about non-avian dinosaurs in historical times. You know, like it would look. I'm not going to disagree with Ken Hovind that it would be cool if St. George fought a dinosaur, right? Like that would be cool.
Yeah, well, Ken Hovind didn't come up with that argument. That was circulating around in the Duane Gish worldview, and one of the infamous books that he wrote for kids, Dinosaurs by Design. He was explicitly there's a picture of St. George slaying a baryonyx in the book. There's a fire-breathing Parasaurolophus. All of that's in Duane Gish by the 1990s.
By the way, Gutsa Gibbon has a review of that book on her channel, and she has the physical copy in her hand while she's going over it.
Yeah, so do I. Isn't that a hoot?
Yeah, if you want a fun little
really
breakdown of that
little
book.
books. They're very thin books aimed for kids. Whole Market. He did another one, a creationism book. I've acquired quite a few of those over the years. But the dinosaurs on Noah's Ark is a logical consequence of the idea that the Ark was there to preserve all the animal life. So they were kinds. They must have been on the Ark. But the problem is they don't tend to think about that like with therapsids, with dimetrodons. They don't think about it with giant euryptids. They don't, because they're largely unfamiliar with that stuff.
RJ, there are some dicynodonts in the Ark Encounter program, if I remember.
Oh yeah, they have now. Oh yeah, the Ark Encounter now has had to include those things. Although even in their own accounting, they still have about half of the animals aboard it dropping dead, going extinct, and that's because they can't get past the fact that they can't really resolve that fossil issue about what happened after the Ark. Now you get non-paleontologists like Andrew Snelling seriously trying to argue that the elephant kind on the Ark turned into all the mammoths and mastodons after the Ark.
Not just that,
a period of a few hundred years.
Also that they go with all of Proboscidea, so all the Gomphotheres, all of the Moatherium, Gomphotheres, all of the four-tusked quote unquote elephants, like just a whole host of animals. Because the thing that your average everyday creationist, like, I have a regular old job, but I go to church on Sunday, and it's a young earth creationist church, and like I send my kids to the Sunday school where they get taught creationism. Those guys, they don't have any idea that anything past mastodons and mammoths and modern elephants has ever existed.
Yeah.
Like, if you were to show them like any of the ancient proboscideans, they just what was that? I don't know. Is that a pig? Maybe.
Yeah, I'm still not sure how a flood causes an ice age too.
It doesn't.
Oh, this is what's so hilarious about it, that they've got this incredible fun house of continents sliding around, of forests being heated into coal, baked, and other areas flash freezing frozen mammoths, and glaciers cutting stuff. All of this happening uber fast, but yet they don't really work out where and exactly when all of this is happening. And this is true of all of the serious young earth creationists, that it never gets past the cartoon level. The thing that all of what we're bouncing around in here now brings up the thing that got me into the debating angle, which is source methods, which is, how does the creationist manage to miss all this data? How do they manage to not work all of that out? Those are source methods issues. And that's why when I've been debating creationists, I want to find out where they're getting their argument from and show why they really shouldn't be relying on the people that they do.
And conversely, what you said, like, why aren't you dealing with the data? But yeah, like you just said, there's the other thing where it's like, where does this idea that you're positing come from? And it just happened to me today. It wasn't a debate, but I was discussing a blog post that a creationist who goes by In His Image, although he says his actual name at the beginning. He says his actual name at the beginning of his stuff. He's Henry. And so he just today posted a blog. I can't talk today. Blog, that's how you say it. A blog about how you measure fitness and how apparently it's inconsistent. And one of the things he said in it was that apparently, quote unquote, evolutionists think that tetrachromacy is a beneficial mutation. And now, if you don't know, tetrachromacy is a condition where you actually have 4 different kinds of cone cells in your eyes. Normally, you would have 3, right? You have a red, a blue, and a green. In tetrachromats, who are always double X individuals, by the way, because the genes controlling this are on the X chromosome. So if you've ever seen one of those online tests to test if you're a tetrachromat, and I've seen a whole bunch of people who I know have Y chromosomes say, oh yeah, I am. It's like, no, you're not. The test is bogus. Just a little PSA right there. Those tests are all bogus. But actually what ends up happening is one of your types of cones gets 2 different alleles that are co-dominant that shift the peak spectrum for peak stimulation of that cone cell in 2 different ways. So one goes a bit to the left and the other one goes a bit to the right. And what actually happens is you end up actually getting lower ability to detect color differences. It's actually a minor form of color blindness, and it's one of the only forms of color blindness that is prominent in Homo sapiens females and not in males, because as a result of a lot of the cones, the genes related to vision being on the X chromosome, males are much more likely to have defective copies than females, who are more likely to have a good copy on at least one of their chromosomes, right? So, but this is one of the rare forms where only females can get this form of mild color blindness. And so my question to him was, where did you get that this was a fitness advantage? I was like, well, I've been told that. I was like, well, do you have any papers? He's like, no, I've never seen one. I was like, well, if it's not in the literature, it's not in the science. And if you're trying to argue against the science, you can't claim, oh, some guy once told me. That's not how this works.
Yeah. And so that's all a natural source methods thing. Well, I've been delighted to see so many people who have been moving in their own direction towards a source methods approach. I didn't have to prod them on it. Dapper was doing that. Vice Rhino's been doing that. Pelagia, Erica, Dan Stern Cardinale, the whole Jackson. All of these are ones who are asking these fundamental questions of who says, and is it true? Yeah. And how do you go about checking that? And that's the essence. It's not rocket science. It's very straightforward. And go ahead.
So you think like I can't say the word. Think because they're doing it on videos then, and now the internet, it's easier to debunk them.
Oh, it's certainly
in
easier
some respects, yes.
Yeah. One thing that is great now is I don't have to necessarily leave the internet most of the time in order to get a source. It used to be, and I remember a time when it was basically the case where in order to get a source, I would have to find a place that had a physical publication. And that could often be a hassle because like your local public library probably doesn't have a subscription to all the scientific journals.
Even college libraries. I couldn't do a proper source analysis of Duane Gish, his books, even though I had them back in the 1990s, because none of the obscure journals in there were available at the universities. I have 3 universities in Spokane, Whitworth, Eastern, and Gonzaga. None of them have a serious paleontology department, so they didn't have any of these things, which means I can't check them. I would have to write off to somebody to get me a copy of the thing. This was laborious. Now it's all mouse click. And so it makes the thing where you get into the difficulty of source analyzing creationists is they're a pile of fog a lot. So a Nephilim Free and Mr. Batman that I have my debate with, this was just a nebulous nothing. Whereas at least you get sources dangled at you by standing for truth and some people of that caliber.
RJ, you and I have both had the displeasure of interacting with Mr. Batman. What a waste of space that man is. It is. Yeah. Look, I try to be polite, but did you see his I'm not even going to call it a debate. Did you see his interaction with Jim Majors?
I can't recall that because I haven't watched all of his stuff. I'll take your word for it. If he behaved the way he did with me.
I'm not necessarily recommending that you see it, but I'll just say this. It very quickly devolved to a point where I am now uncomfortable with the idea that he is allowed near children. Let's just say that.
Oh, he has this weird obsession about pedophilia. He was ranting about that in the debate he had with me.
Yeah, in hopes of keeping this. I don't even know if this channel is monetized. I was hoping to keep it there, so it's why I didn't mention it by name. But yes.
Oh, yeah, true. Yeah, sorry. I just blunder in with the terminology on there.
Yes, I was trying to be.
That's a good point. Internet made my journey to and away from YEC a lot more convenient with research. That's the wonder that we have available today. Nobody has a legitimate excuse for stupid in 2020. Not with the availability of the information that we have today.
Well, one thing I would like to say about that comment, if you could bring it up again real quick, Vandalia. So it gives the double-edged nature of the internet, right? Because it says my journey to and away. And so one of the problems that we get with the internet is that while if you want to be careful and intellectually honest and check for rigorous sources, you can. It's also really easy to fall into an echo chamber of nonsense.
Yeah.
Because
Standing for Truth does that.
Right.
He is knee deep in sources The problem is he doesn't really understand them, and he doesn't read much outside them.
But he remembers the big words, though.
Oh, yeah.
Which
Created heterozygosity.
Big words that he doesn't really understand seem to be about 80% of SFT's content.
Yeah, never be thrown off by jargon. And if somebody tries to throw you off with jargon, do the simple question is saying, can you explain that? What does that mean? And if the person can't explain it, then they don't really understand it.
Yeah, I don't know if this is with all the YC debaters and stuff. At least what most of the ones I've noticed is how often they don't stay on topic of the debate.
Yeah.
Well,
You're not misinformed here. That there is a degree of wandering and a tendency. For one thing, if you start pushing back on a point they raise, rather than engaging on it, they jump to another rock. And the way I described this with Kent Hovind in my interactions with him, I said, willing neither to defend his position nor abandon it. That's characteristic of Hovind. And there's a bunch of people online that behave exactly that way.
Well, it also even comes down to what topics creationists will suggest, because creationists have a tendency to suggest just absurdly broad topics. Like, I would like to debate evolution, including the Big Bang and abiogenesis and nucleosynthesis and
Nephilim is like
formation.
that. You want to discuss the mechanisms of evolution when he means like the reason why there's like matter.
Right. For creationists, evolution essentially is synonymous with the mainstream scientific consensus on almost everything, which to one extent, it shows you just how completely insane the position is because, I'm sorry, you want to dispute essentially all of science? Like, all of it? Okay, I guess you can, but like, can you see why that's kind of silly? But then on the other hand, it also is a good debate tactic, because if you agree to a discussion about essentially all of science, who here or anywhere is an expert on all of science? I will wait for someone to volunteer themselves, and then I will pick an area and I will show them to be wrong, because you're not an expert on all of science.
Creo mentions those magical words, second law of thermodynamics, probabilities. I would put in information. That's one of the real big buzzwords that pops up in there. But it's interesting now that second law of thermodynamics argument, that's a diagnostic almost exclusively of young Earth creationists. And so sometimes you can be able to pin down where somebody's coming from. The moment they start asking you, well, how do you know that's old? Don't you know there's problems with radiometric dating? Uh-oh, we got a young Earth creationist here, folks, because that never comes up outside of that framework.
So I want to, sorry.
Sorry. I was saying, does this all go back to this Gallup thing we were talking about, lots of different subject matter involved in?
That comes back to the Gish Gallup, because Gish likes to do these broad debates. But the problem was, at the time, he was sort of the pioneer of this whole thing. So his debate opponents didn't really have anything to fall back onto in terms of what to look at to prepare. And so he would pull out these things from wild left field that didn't have anything really to do with the topic of evolution. And his poor, biologist opponents would be stuck trying to answer questions about like the Big Bang. And it's like, why? But going back to the second law of thermodynamics, I have a favorite question to ask creationists when they bring it up. And it's very simple. If you understand thermodynamics, you should tell me what units entropy is measured in.
Oh, you've been nasty on that one. I don't even know that I would be terribly good at that. The neatest explanation I've had from, I think, Steve, Ken Miller. I think it was Steve Bauman who brought it up. That second law of thermodynamics, if a creationist tries to bring it up with you, you have got them by the balls, because there's an aspect. Thermodynamics is the transfer of heat from hot to cold. And so if you do this, feel how warm your fingers become, it's inevitable. So if all of the stuff that supposedly is happening during the flood, continents moving around, and all of this, it all involves thermodynamic shifts. Too much is happening at the same time. Your thermostat gets hotter, and it's way beyond just warm fingers. You're vaporizing the Earth.
And
that's thermodynamics. You can't get away from it.
The top level professional creationist, quote unquote, researchers admit to it.
They all
Like,
know this, and often it's buried in the footnotes in their papers. And there was an article, I think, at the Acts and Facts from the Institute for Creation Research, and buried down in the footnote, where they were saying there is still a legitimate controversy over this matter of the heat issue.
Yeah, legitimate controversy, to put it mildly.
And look at how Standing for Truth has waffled on the heat issue. He just kind of I don't want to think about that.
He has now gone on to say several times that he doesn't think there is a heat issue. It's like, I mean, your creationist pal disagree. Yeah. Well, so one of my favorite ways to illustrate this is because, okay, so the numbers are hard to understand, right? Because they're just gigantic. They're literally astronomical. Like, we're talking about Earth becoming hotter than the sun, right?
Yeah.
Right. So one thing I like to say is, okay, you know what viscosity is, right? It's the ability of a liquid to flow freely. Well, if you look
and your molasses is more viscous than water.
Right. But the asphalt that is the road surfacing for most roads in, say, you know, most developed countries, right? The pitch, which is the stuff that surrounds the little pebbles that you see in there, that is actually a liquid. It's a very high viscosity liquid. And its viscosity is about 10,000 times that of water, right? So compare how solid that seems and how much heat you would have to use on it to get it to flow like water. And then realize that the mantle, which is technically a liquid, is about as much more viscous than asphalt as asphalt is compared to water. Now think about how much heat it would take to get the continents to slide into place from Pangea to where they are today in the space of a year.
I joked about it in the Dynamania, in the old chapter 3 at Tip. I said that all of the creationist lawyers, Philip Johnson and Wendell Bird and all these others, should engage a class action suit against God, suing on behalf of the Harappa culture of India, because they were all killed off when the super fast continents of India, slamming across the Indian Ocean at breakneck speed, slammed into there, and all those poor little Harappans died of whiplash.
Actually, you know, there is actually a legal history of people attempting to sue God, but having trouble serving him usually means that their lawsuits fall flat.
That is part of the problem. He said that's what happens when you try to sue an absentee landlord.
Actually, there was a case of someone suing themselves and winning, and thereby actually recovering damages from his own insurance company, who was liable for his lawsuit. Yeah,
and now he's a lawyer for Donald Trump.
He said he was negligent in the course of his injury, and that he should be held liable. And because he had the insurance who wasn't wanting to pay out, the courts made his insurance pay out because he lost the lawsuit against himself. Yeah. So that's a thing that happens. Good old law system.
I am saying that on the one thing I do when I'm watching, it's a different thing when you're in debate with somebody live as opposed to watching a debate or watching a lecture that you're going to be criticizing. And there I sit down, I got my iced tea, and I'm watching the video, and I'm ready to do the freeze frame, because most of the time it's just blither, blither, blither. So if they're just stating statements, they may or may not bump into the data field anytime during that. But if they stop and put a slide up where there's a quote attributed to an actual person, Nephilim Free will do that sort of thing, or a fact that's supposedly from a particular technical journal and they make the mistake of putting the information down, that's when you do the freeze frame and you write it down and you track down, because now they're intersecting the data field. And you can now analyze whether or not it's a fair representation of the data field or an unfair one. And odds are 70% of the time, you're going to be able to find the original source reference on that stuff and be able to inspect it yourself. It's that accessible nowadays.
Although also, I will also say sometimes you get requests from creationists for sources on things that are just like so trivial that it's like, why would you want a source? Like, going back to just today, because it's fresh on my mind, when I was talking about fitness, and in his image had said that there's no reproductive advantage to being heterozygous for sickle cell anemia in malarial areas. And I was like, if you don't die so much, you get to reproduce more on average. Like, why would you want a source for that? If you're dead, you're not reproducing. Yeah. If you're alive, you can be reproducing. He's like, well, they don't have to. It's like, okay, but on average, dead people don't reproduce. Living people do.
It's just like there was a
Therefore-
sudden drop-off of Carl Sagan's book writing after he died.
Right, exactly. It's although
Need a
I mean there
source?
wasn't.
Is that like with Kit Hovind's claim? You don't know if that bone had any kids or had any different kids.
It's similar in
yeah,
the same vein that it's like, why would you care?
Did you hear the answer I gave to him? I told him every single one of those bones had parents.
Yeah. So we know they were part of a reproducing population.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if that particular one. And I told him the same thing. I don't remember if it was before or after you did. And he was like, oh, but you see, you just said that they had parents and they reproduce something like themselves. I'm like, right. Because that's sort of a requirement for evolution that offspring generally resemble their parents. Yeah. And which also then comes back to, or not back to, but it also reminds me of not an interaction, but I responded to, what is his name? He's that sort of pudgy Canadian guy who hosts not Creation Today. What is it? Like Genesis Today or something like that.
Ian Juby.
Ian Juby, that's it.
Ooh,
That's it.
Yeah, I haven't seen much of his, but I have read some of his crap.
So Ian Juby had this video about the supposed evolution of sex, where he seems to think that any minor shift in the reproductive organs of one sex will require an identical compatibility shift in the sex of the opposite sex. And I'm just like, Ian, you belong to a species that has considerable differences in the size and shape of reproductive organs, but tab A won't fit into slot B is never something that I've heard in terms of fertility problems for a couple. Like, that's not a thing that comes up a lot. Your own species disproves your point completely without even having to argue about their evolutionary history. It's just, are all penises the same size? No. Are all vaginas the same size? No. Is physical incompatibility the normal cause of infertility, or even just one of the ones you ever hear about? No. So it's not
another
that big of a
advantage
problem.
of the source checking thing on videos is that you learn shit. The very act of tracking stuff down, especially on subjects that you didn't know before, and you go, oh, wow, that's fascinating. I didn't know that. And then you start researching more, and often do something as simple as when you put in a search for a technical paper, put in most of the title, because then you'll often be pulling up other material in addition to stuff that's been citing it that are on related themes, and you go, ooh, I didn't know that there was that much out there. Wow.
Yeah, joke. What gets out? A little joke here. What gets outdated faster? The science, letters or computers.
I would still say computers, but it's close, and it depends on the field. For instance, in some very fast-moving fields like genetics, if you're not on top of the literature, you just have no reason to talk about it. Whereas on the other hand, if you're doing like paleontology, there's still good reason to cite papers from like the 1880s, because I mean there are fossils that have been described in the 1880s and not touched since. And if you're going to write about that fossil,
it's fair to say that if you're relying on older material for perspectives, holy shit, you're going to be in a mess. Because in paleontology, like bird evolution is a perfectly fine example. When I was first diving into bird evolution in the 1990s, there was like 3 or 4 Mesozoic birds known. And starting in the mid 1990s, that went from 5 to 15 to 30 to, and so now we have an enormous glut of Mesozoic avians that have been just discovered since the 1990s. So if you're relying on books, particularly if you're a poor lowly creationist who is relying on a Kent Hovind video from 2000 that's relying on creationist writers from the 1970s, oh boy, already you're completely off the map on there. Geology, anything that's pre-plate tectonics, in genetics, anything pre-1990s, because that's when homeobox genes were developed. So it's really, with the fields today advancing so quickly, it can almost be argued that anything predating 1995 be more wary of, because that's a long time ago in scientists' years.
Yeah, it's one of the things is that it's. I'm not going to say it's never appropriate to cite an old paper. Sometimes it is, right, and it's going to be somewhat case by case. But as a general rule of thumb, if you're citing things that are more than 10 years old, unless you can show me that no work has been done on this topic since then, you are probably citing something that's too old to be taken seriously.
Oh, and that's also a dead giveaway, Dapper, is that if somebody is trying to throw a paper at you from 1980 on a particular subject, you would go, like, science stopped then? And that should immediately pique your curiosity as to why they're relying on such an old work.
Speaking of that, it's the most recent thing that I know about, maybe more recent now, is Mary Schweitzer dinosaur thing. That's the most recent thing they use.
So it is one of the more
among them. You get the cold slab argument is fairly recent, but it's the hot button thing because it's supposedly the smoking gun of recent thing. That why those giant textured bone, blood vessels, blood tissue can't possibly have survived undeterred for millions of years. It must be only a few thousand years old, when in fact we discover that they're tiny little microscopic snippets that are buried down inside a bone that they had to put like acids on to soften up, and that no. That's perfectly feasible.
And hey, wait, can I go on my Mark Armitage soft tissue Tyrannosaurus?
Yes, rant for us.
Triceratops.
Talk about Triceratops horns in quotes.
Okay, so Mark Armitage claims to have pulled out these sheets upon sheets of soft tissue from a supposed Triceratops horn. There are numerous problems, one of which was that in his pictures of the finds, you can see obvious contamination from bacteria and plants and fungi, and he admits to having found as much. But there is nothing in his methods where he said how he separated out this contamination from the fossil when he then dissolved it in acid to recover these soft tissues. But even ignoring that, right? That's the big thing. Ignoring that, we don't have a map for the samples that were taken. We don't have adequate pictures of the samples in situ. We only have one picture of the horn in situ, and it's a terrible picture that doesn't even let you know how long it is. We don't have a picture for the rib or the vertebra he found that show it in situ. We don't have a site map. He didn't even properly identify the formation where it was found. He gave a name of a formation that isn't found in the literature, which means he has to, if he's trying to name a new formation, which you can do, I mean, that's fine, but you have to adequately describe it with a whole geological, the geological context, exactly where you can find outcroppings.
Air quotes technical paper. This relevant information that ought to be there ain't there.
So basically, all we can say is one time Mark found a horn of something, and he recovered something from it that was stretchy. That's all we can say. And
here's again where we get into historical issues. Because we've been down this race course before, the creationists will have their hobby horses that are just ubiquitously presented, and then they kind of fade away. The Paluxy River tracks were the soft tissue issue of the 1970s, where supposedly there were human and dinosaur tracks together in the same deposit, Paluxy River, Texas. That's proof positive, until John Morris, the son of Henry Morris, was finally brought down there by critics, and he's looking at there and he's going, no, actually, this is just the heel mark of a standard theropod. It's not a human footprint. And
well, it wasn't just a standard theropod. It's an ornithomimid, to be fair.
Yeah, but the issue is that this was ubiquitous in anti-evolution apologetics and creationist apologetics in the 1960s and 70s, and now it's very rare, but yet the people who bring it up will be somebody like Kent Hovind relying on Carl Ball, reviving on the thing, repeating it over and over again, or people who have been reading old creationist literature and not knowing that there's been more dust settled since then, not realizing that. So the same way that you constantly bit the Piltdown case that constantly gets mentioned, That's the one that's a recurring favorite. They still trot that one out today, and almost invariably Nebraska Man. Why? Because that's what's in the creationist discussions of it.
I hate the Nebraska Man one even more because at least Piltdown Man was taken seriously by some scientists for a while, a fairly long time, really. But Nebraska Man was
like
never
a shelf life of like 6 months.
Right, and it was never taken very seriously by anyone but the person who first found the tooth
and said it was a hominin tooth. It was just a misidentified tooth.
Right.
And it was thing to misidentify. Again,
and even he didn't like that artist rendering that guy did. Even he was like, no, that's not right.
Yeah, it's very frustrating.
Newspaper article that I covered it in Planet of the Apes chapter at TIP. I go into how the Piltdown story built up and also the Nebraska Man story. And whereas Piltdown is a legitimately bad fake, there's also even a reason why it lasted so long. You put the chronology in. It's that it was found in 1912, 13, 14. The guy that found it died during World War I. World War I kept everybody really busy. They made casts of it and kept the precious fossils stuck away in the British Museum so people couldn't look at the originals much anymore. They were all using the casts. And then World War II came along, so that was keeping everybody occupied. Then almost immediately, though, by the time you get to 1945, they now had all these African Australopithecines and newer fossils coming along, and Piltdown didn't look like it fit anymore. That's why they immediately started studying this thing again and realized, no, this was a fake, a fraud, and it disappeared kapoof. And worse, no creationist claimed it was a fraud. Creationists claimed it wasn't a transitional. They didn't say it was fraudulent. It was the scientists that proved it was fraud.
Yeah. In fact, the only, up until very recently, the only actual frauds that I've ever seen creationists really put forth in terms of like, we think this is a fraud, but the scientific community doesn't agree, has been Archaeopteryx, except that there have been too many fossils now of Archaeopteryx for the Archaeopteryx to have really been a fraud.
Who was still pushing that Archaeopteryx fraud thing just last year.
Oh, but here's the other thing. He also argues why Archaeopteryx doesn't count as a valid transitional, even if it's real. It's like, well, pick a lane, dude. Is it? It doesn't count.
Well,
or is it a fraud?
Guy, he's all over the map on everything. He is the Donald Trump of creationism.
You know, that's surprisingly accurate. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it, but
yeah, I did one of my very earliest YouTubes was on. Kent Hovind is the Donald Trump of creationism, or Donald Trump is the Kent Hovind of politics. Either way, that they are exactly the same kind of exceedingly narcissistic ignoramuses who have a fundamentally bad method, who are never wrong. That's why if Trump ever goes to jail, he won't be contrite any more than Kent Hovind was contrite.
I don't think Trump's going to prison anytime soon. I'll be honest.
Yeah,
I don't think so either. I want something much worse for him. I want to lose all his money.
That is a possibility.
Yeah,
that's already happened.
He got $1.1 billion in debt. Anyway, we digress.
But another thing I hear a lot of them saying is that the quote, it's a common designer. They use the same template for all the animals or plants or whatever.
Yeah. And so there it's a cat. Oh, go ahead, Dino, and then I'll put in any comment that I want.
So there's a couple problems here. One is, common designers do sometimes use common templates. That's a valid thing to say in terms of divine. But one of the problems is that common designers don't just follow the template. They grab what they think will work best. So for instance, if you need something that's going to swim through the water and catch fish and be a bird, there's still no particular reason why you have to go with the relatively inefficient design of shifting a bird wing into a flipper. For instance, sea turtles have much better flippers than penguins do. Why not just grab the bone structure from a sea turtle and shove it onto a bird torso and neck and then go with it?
Yeah.
It would be a much better system because the additional flexibility, the ability to actually use the elbows for something, all of this stuff is actually more efficient. That's one of the reasons why sea turtles can get respectable speeds with relatively low rates of flapping their fins. Whereas if you ever look at say a penguin swimming, they're frantic. They're flapping those poor little wings just so often just to get any kind of speed. And you could come up with much better designs. It's one of the
rare cases where birds have been able to invade an aquatic habitat. The dinosaurs finally made it with those birds, but boy, it's not pretty sight.
Well, the problem with dinosaurs is their eggs are super dependent on being laid in air, because the way that they get oxygen is through air diffusion through tiny pores in the eggshell. So they're sort of hardwired to be really bad at being aquatic, which is why it's so uncommon to get truly aquatic birds or dinosaurs in general. Yeah. But
my go-to example on a weird design that the common design argument doesn't explain are tooth enamel genes.
Oh yeah.
You make a toothless mammal like a baleen whale, all toothless mammals, and you put tooth enamel genes in them. This is like putting a gas tank on a Tesla or a bale of hay in the back of your car for your horse. This doesn't make sense. That if you're going to make a toothless mammal, why would you do that? But in fact, all toothless mammals have tooth enamel genes as pseudogenes, and even mammals that lack tooth enamel still have the tooth enamel genes as well.
Yeah, and also I think also back to common designer thing. They use non-living things like cars or planes or skateboards to say, see this. All these are similar, so that's why living things that can reproduce are created.
That kind of an argument has a double-edged sword to it, because if you look at designed objects, you could say a 1959 Cadillac and a 1959 Lincoln and a 1959 Imperial all have wheels, and they've got fenders, and they've got headlights and steering wheels and upholstery and camshafts and blah, 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 but they're all designed by minds. Yes, but they're not designed by the same minds. How do you know there was a single designer? And that's the fascinating thing, is that every one of these designer ones really have a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Jesus Christ is the designer model, not the idea that there was Marduk designing penguins and Quetzalcoatl doing dinosaurs, the feathered serpent. I mean, why not?
let's be a little bit more ecumenical and say the Abrahamic God, because let's not forget there are Jewish and Muslim creationists who would not accept the Jesus design answer, but they would say that the God of Abraham.
By the way, the person I was doing on that was Bill Dembski, who has explicitly used that argument that it's Jesus Christ in person who was doing all this designing.
Yeah. I mean, look.
Yeah.
I'm not here to tell you what religion to have or anything. However, from a strictly scientific standpoint, even if you could demonstrate design, it would be very hard to differentiate between single designer versus multiple designers who get to copy from each other.
The designer of the dinosaurs is the same one that did the Ediacara biota and the Cambrian arthropods and all of the Cenozoic mammals. I mean, the disparity there is far greater than between the 59 Cadillac and the 59 Lincoln.
Yeah.
And or between no one's claiming that all the time by the same people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
we get a lot of problems.
Sorry. Yeah, because the 59 Cadillac cannot evolve into a 2020 Cadillac.
Well, certainly not.
However, and here's the other big issue here, because this is the Paley watch analogy. Where it breaks down is the moment you have reproduction, because no automobile mates. Your Toyota is not going out and boinking the Honda next door. That's never going to happen.
You don't know that.
So you don't have little. Well, let's put it this way. That's where little lawnmowers come from. If the moment you have reproduction with genetic modification that can be inherited, you are now in a Darwinian worldview. And this is the thing that creationists, they don't realize, or in fact, to some extent, they do realize, because they have had to adopt at the higher level theoretical end, the modern day young Earth creationists are well aware, yes, speciation happens. Yes, natural selection happens. Variation within a kind. The problem is they can't mark off carefully, where do you draw the line on where things are? How do you avoid getting into those? And when you look into their baraminology, you discover in every case that they're leaving out the edges so that they don't have the overlap. Because there's so many almost this and nearly that's. Try to furrow your way through the dinosaurs. Dapper Dino knows about this. Work your way through any of those lineages and demark where the nice, neat, tidy lines are.
Yeah, tell me the big difference between basal ornithopods and, say, basal thyreophorans. Good luck. Yeah. But then look at, say, the difference between Ankylosaurus and, say, Edmontosaurus, and it's gigantic. But you go back down into the early Cretaceous, Jurassic, and it's like, so remind me again why Scutellosaurus is so much different from, say, Heterodontosaurus.
Yeah.
And the answer is I mean, it's not.
Up there, they claim the curse and degeneration caused inefficient design. Yeah, that's their get out of thinking free card in the creationism game, that they can just, it's the fall. Yeah, that's why there's malaria, or fill in the blank. It's all, although Michael Behe
didn't exist until after the fall.
Gets into a problem with that malaria issue, because he is actually arguing in his more recent books that the mutation that's preventing our antibiotics from working might have been designed, which means you got a sadistic designer coming on there and go, no, don't you go curing that malaria. No. That's kind of creepy.
Yeah. Well, actually, I've had the discussion about sickle cell and malaria numerous times with creationists. And it seems very hard to get them to understand that there's two things that it seems hard to get them to understand. That one, your preference doesn't matter to evolution. The fact that you don't like sickle cell anemia does not matter to evolution. Not even a little bit. But the other one is that whether something is beneficial or not is entirely context dependent. What is beneficial in environment A is detrimental in environment B and neutral in environment C. So if you were in an environment with super oxygenation where your blood oxygen levels don't matter much, sickle cell anemia wouldn't be much of a problem. Okay, but in the current real world, in most places that aren't, don't have a lot of malaria, even being heterozygous for sickle cell anemia is a slight detriment because you're going to have a slightly lower life expectation. But if you're in an area where one of the most common causes of death is malaria,
there's even a term. There's a term for that category. It's called the scorched earth defense. That a deleterious mutation can be selected for if it protects you from something that's worse. And so malaria kills more people than the sickle cell anemia gene will do. So it survives because the downsides of it, if you're in a malaria environment. Now, Africans, where this developed initially, came here involuntarily. Now they're in an environment where there's no selection pressure for the malaria because there isn't malaria here the way it was in Africa. Now that deleterious gene is on its own, and people who get the two alleles to where both parents have it have a serious problem with the anemia, whereas overall it's not a problem. And by the way, this is cropped up independently in various humans. I think there's another bunch that have got a sickle cell mutation that performs a comparable function, and it's a different spot of the world developed independently. But and there's I think there are a couple other illnesses that are thought to be scorched earth defenses because they insulate you from something else. A weird irony here, for example, is that the efforts to clean up measles in the early 20th century produced a polio outbreak, because getting immune to the measles, surviving that, immunized you from the polio parasite, the polio thing. And so when they cleaned everything up, suddenly you have this burst of polio because the selection pressure has been removed. There's another scorched earth defense issue.
Yeah, but what frustrates me the most is when there are these things they're not controversial at all and don't even necessarily contradict young earth creationism. Like, is accepting the standard definition of fitness and accepting why malarial resistance from sickle cell, would that ruin young earth creationism? No, not on its own, but because it it feels too evolutiony, and it concedes a little bit more ground than they're used to or were comfortable with. They're just like, no. It's like, you know what, guys? If you guys want to make yourselves look stupider than you have to, I'm not going to complain too much. You have fun.
That's why you still get another one of the buzzwords that everybody who has dealt with creationists hits over is speciation. And whereas your serious anti-evolutionists have pretty much thrown in the towel on speciation. Yes, speciation occurs. New species originate in nature. You find this all the way through. It's ubiquitous in modern creationist literature. When you get to grassroots anti-evolutionists, they still dig in the heels and refuse to accept speciation.
Is that where they say, but there's still flies, or there's still bacteria, or there's still this, or there's still that?
They'll always just pick whatever
that's
taxon they're most familiar with. Yeah. And the thing is,
and they'll be invariably what you want to have in the back of your head, and there we get back to the how to use in a debate context, is whenever they bring up, well, the dogs are still dogs, and I go, well, what about myocytes? Where do they fit on this scheme? And they've never heard of that because their creationist literature has not discussed it.
Are borophagians dogs too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I had my, or rather when I was trying to have my debate with Mr. Batman on dinosaurs surviving with human beings, and of course he doesn't know, he literally didn't know diddly squat about dinosaurs. I was trying to bring up the spectrum from Psittacosaurids to Protoceratopsids to Ceratopsids and their biogeography in Asia and the New World. Well, boy, I was operating the contrail was way above his head at that point. And it never even landed on it because he was still wandering around in philosophy and all that. But I was trying to bring that up because that was yet another example of those almosts and this and that.
Yeah, like I did not know until recently that hyenas that look like dogs are more related to cats than they are to dogs.
Yeah. And have fascinating sex lives and all the other kinds of things.
Fascinating is one word for it. But actually, in terms of the dinosaur thing, it's actually a recurring thing that I see with creationists who like to talk about dinosaurs is they don't know what a dinosaur is. They can successfully identify certain genera as dinosaurs.
Yeah.
But when you ask them...
But no better than your average 6-year-old.
Right. What if you found a new fossil whose genus you didn't know or was... newly discovered. You're the first one to find this genus. How do you know if it's a dinosaur before you go and give it a name and talk about its life history and whatnot? But they have no clue. In fact,
that's why certain bones would be more diagnostic than others as to identify that, because some of them are related to the things that allow you to identify it as a dinosaur.
And that's how you got your
some ankle bones or a femur or a skull. Or a hip bone, you can tell if that's a dinosaur. You get some
bones are an important issue to deal with, and this is a way for anybody that wants to do debates with creationists. Here's another helpful hint: is if you see a collection of bones in a graphic that everybody that searches around for stuff, they can see them. You can see them with human evolution. You can see them with critters of all types. When you see those, ask yourself how many of those can you identify specifically or at least generically. So if you look at a skull, can you go, oh, that's a mammal, isn't it? As opposed to, oh, that's some reptile or dinosaur maybe. And if you can't perceive a lot of that from your own familiarity, you're probably not going to be able to do very well in dealing with the creationist who may or may not know any more than you are. But if it's a matter of everybody flailing around not knowing one thing from another, you're in trouble. So that's an area that I think can be really quite useful on that at the very least. I played the game. There's a lot of paleontologists I follow on Twitter, and every once in a while, some of them will throw up various fossil information, and they won't necessarily go out of their way to say what they are because they're talking to other paleontologists. So they're just putting this is neat. And I will go, okay, is that a so-and-so or not? And that's helping me refine in my own sense as to, am I familiar enough with the material? In the same way that if somebody is shown the tail light of a vehicle, could you go, oh, that's a 1959 Cadillac. Yeah, there it is. That's the only one that looks like that. Then you know your cars. If you're looking at it and you can't tell that from an F-15, then you are in the wrong line of analysis.
Oh, can I mention one of my pet peeves in terms of comparative anatomy with creationism?
Okay.
It's creationists who pretend that reptiles have diaphragms. Please, if you're a
yes, I
creationist,
just heard that one, and the one that you were. Oh my God!
look, creationists, please listen to me. Listen to me right now. Any creationist who watches this, if you think that reptiles breathe with a diaphragm the way that mammals do, 1, you are wrong. 2, you are too ignorant about comparative anatomy to talk about it. And 3, that's okay. Just stop talking about it and actually read up on how reptile respiration works. Then you can come back. But please stop. I have heard it from too many people, like, how do you go from having a diaphragm to having an avian style of respiration? It's like, well, first of all, you never had a diaphragm to begin with. So I don't know why it's an issue.
Hi, Brainbug.
Hey, Brainbug. How's it going, man?
Brainbug was the first human organism that was guest on Evolution Hour after I got back on with the laptop mode there. And his picture looked better than mine, damn it. But yeah, I hope everybody is catching the fact that you should never feel intimidated by this stuff. You should feel energized. You should be delighted at the accessibility of the information. You should be inflamed by the delight in it. It's so much fun. You'll learn so many interesting crap. It's just, how can you not? It's like a candy store on steroids. We're living in this wonderful time when we can get everything at our mouse clicks. Wow.
But I will say that doesn't mean jump into a debate before you do those mouse clicks. You need to know what's up before you jump into the debate, because I've seen, it's not terribly often, but I've seen a few people try to debate creationism who have not adequately researched both the actual science and the creationist nonsense. You need to have a good handle on both. If you couldn't give a lecture where you're pretending to be a young Earth creationist and have it be accepted by at least lay young Earth creationists, you're not ready to tackle the discussion from that standpoint. And again,
you should have a clear idea of what your opponent is going to be saying on that topic. If your opponent has a track record of written or online material, for heaven's sake, research it, be familiar with it. First of all, from a practical aspect, the odds are that person will be repeating the same stuff over and over and over again. So a familiarity, a sampling of their work will probably familiarize yourself with that. And if you aren't even willing to go to that level, why should anybody take you seriously? Dapper and I and everybody else that I know of in the network take that obligation to be on your game seriously, because you don't want to, nothing is worse than looking like I don't know anything about that. Well, then why are we listening to you?
And conversely, though, you should, I would say, before you want to debate a certain topic, try to reach out to someone in that field and have a conversation with them. And if you can you don't have to be on their level, but if you can have a conversation where you can feel like you're holding your own, they're not using terms that you've just never heard of and things like that. And that's one of the things that I've done. Like when I do debates about, say, like dinosaurs, I talk to
clarify.
Sorry. I talk like, and
the last thing you ever want to do is be thrown off. You don't ever want to be thrown off by terminology. Don't be intimidated by terminology. Make it your little friend to where you are able to deal with it and be able to explain it. I felt very happy in my debate with Kent Hovind when one of the questioners in the live chat asked about baraminology, and I could explain it better than Kent Hovind could. So I know that creationist topic better than the creationist does. What's wrong with this picture?
Yeah, that is always a big one. And that's actually one of the things that I find creationists are super deficient at. I have yet to meet a creationist who could adequately describe the scientific consensus on evolution or any other topic that they discuss. And even to the point of like a well-informed layman, like none of them can adequately describe the mechanisms for evolution or any of the proposed theories of abiogenesis or the nebular hypothesis of planetary formation, well, the solar system formation or nucleosynthesis or the Big Bang. None of it, not even relativity. Like, none of them
And
even
the other
get
issue
close
is-
to a basic understanding of those things.
Each one of us has what I would call a litmus test item. It's things you know really, really well in all aspects that when you target a question on them, you're going to be able to know whether they're bullshitting or not. So everybody who knows me by now knows how long is it going to go before RJ is going to bring up the reptile mammal transition, eh?
Yep.
Because that's one that I know really well.
Or if the debate at all touches on whether birds are dinosaurs. Yep. It's like, what is a dinosaur? How would you find out if something's a dinosaur? And of course, the answer is wrong.
And that's where you got your famous now opening sequence for your videos.
Exactly. Yeah, that comes from my debate with Kent Hovind, because all of my videos start out with some music by Bent Hovind, my co-host for Kent with Bent. But there's an audio clip that plays of me asking Kent Hovind how he would decide if a skeleton he found were a dinosaur. He's like, well, that's an interesting question. I don't know. It's like, well, then you're not equipped to have the discussion.
And this, I think, is the supreme failure of anti-evolutionists across the board. It's that, can't you come up with a detailed model of what you think happened? Don't blither blather about why evolution can't explain X, Y, or Z. You come up with a model that accounts for all the data better than the evolutionary model, and la-di-da will be impressed. But don't try to end run it the way that they tried to do.
Well, as it also comes back to your whole, like, RJ, that when you say that, you're just going to run to the origins or bust thing, where it's like, let's just go as far back as until everyone is a little bit uncertain, because I don't want to deal with any of the stuff that's, really well understood, because all that stuff ruins everything I'm saying. So we'll go to we'll go to the first place where we can find uncertainty on both sides, and we'll just stick there. It's like
you're racing past all the exclamation marks until you can find a question mark.
Yeah. And the thing is, even if let's just say, right, just for the sake of argument, that the answer to the puzzle of abiogenesis is there is no naturalistic explanation. It has to be a miracle. That's all there is to it. Let's go with it. Sure. You know what? Fine. That doesn't invalidate any of the genetic data for universal common descent. It doesn't invalidate any of the fossil data that tracks evolution through
go away. The one of the little critters go away.
None of this changes.
But yet it's the go-to model, especially for grassroots creationists. It really takes, this in the debate context, you're way more likely to be bumping into somebody that's trying to play the origins or bust card than you will the natural theology gee whiz card, where they've deliberately gone overboard on some little minutiae example of biology that cannot possibly irreducibly complex system that cannot be explained by the godless evolutionists. That's would be rarer to find. Dapper, you can tell on that, and Vandalia, you can put it from your perspective that I'm way more likely to be somebody that's just running on about where life came from. Nephilim used that dodge. Mr. Batman was kind of flipping off in that direction. So even though it's an open question mark, you're more likely to have a position on it because origins or bust is so common. And anybody will watch the debate that I had over origins or bust with Nephilim, I tried to diffuse that by pointing out why he was so obsessive about it. It's because it's that let's run to the question mark thing, and it's an evasion mechanism. And and because it doesn't change anything, I don't care.
I think someone made, I forget who it was, but I think I heard a good example of this is how a baseball glove was made doesn't have any reference in how good you play at baseball.
Yeah. I have a favorite analogy for this, which is my favorite analogy for this is, let's say that you're driving down the road and you see a car run off into the ditch, right? And it's crashed. Okay, so you get out and you investigate, and it's snowy out, and you can see tracks sliding off the road, and you can see you're on a downhill slope, and there's a patch of ice right before the tracks go off the road and into the ditch. And you say, well, I think this car was going wasn't paying attention to how fast they were going because they're on a downhill slope, and they hit the patch of ice, lost control, and slid into the ditch. And then your creationist friend who was in the passenger seat comes out and says, yeah, but I don't know what address this car came from, so who can say? Like, what do you mean?
No, it's worse than that. They'll say, but where did the iron isotopes of the car come from?
Yeah, it's just like, yes, if we go back far enough, we will get to a point where I'm just going to say, I don't know, but that doesn't negate the stuff leading up to that. You don't need to know where literally everything
that both the French anti-evolutionists in Darwin's time, and for that matter, Ernst Haeckel, the evolutionist, was obsessed with origins issues. He thought that you have to nail down where life came from, otherwise you have an incomplete model. Whereas Darwin and Wallace said, who cares? We don't even know how life originated. Let's look at what happened afterward. And they could start figuring it out that way. And it's no coincidence then that that's the model of evolution that really began to pick up, because they were looking at things you could observe now and test now, not keep on obsessing about where nucleotides came from.
But back to Depper's car thing real fast. The other thing that they say too, obviously, it's coming. It says, you see all the evidence there, the tires tracks, but they say, you weren't there. You don't know what happened.
Yeah, well, that's another thing.
Yeah, this is forensic science.
Yeah, if you take that seriously, all of forensic science goes out the window. But no creationist wants to go there. None of them want to say, oh, we should overturn all murder cases that were based on forensic science. Because
that's why Jackson and I called our book The Rocks Were There, because that's the perfect answer to this. I wasn't there. No, you weren't there, but the rocks were there.
Exactly. And it's very frustrating, because the thing is, we know how certain processes progress through time. And granted, in certain areas, it's a little bit harder to extrapolate. And I'll even admit, geology, it's a little trickier, because we can't watch all of the processes from beginning to end. So we have to look at little slices here and there and try to fit them together. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean it's impossible. For instance, I can explain the entire life history of a giant redwood tree on the basis of current redwood trees, which I can only observe for the span of a few decades.
In tiny slices, even though the tree itself is going to be thousands of years old.
Right, but because I can look at trees of all different age categories all through, I can explain how the life history of a single tree will progress.
Astrophysics does the same thing. You can't sit at the telescope long enough to see a star born, form a solar system, and then eventually go supernova and blast its remains. I'm afraid that's a little longer than your butt's going to stand, but you can see stars in every phase of those processes as a series of still pictures. And that's another reason why, although there are young Earth creationist astrophysicists, they don't do much. That astrophysics is the one discipline that is literally time travel, where 100% of it is looking backwards through time. And nobody has the foggiest idea what's going on in Andromeda Galaxy right now. But I can tell you what happened 2.5 million years ago, because we can see it.
Well, actually, that's an interesting thing, because you're aware of Jason Lyle, right?
Yeah. That's what I was thinking of, is the one who doesn't really do much.
Exactly. So reportedly, and I'm trying to see if I can't track this down, but reportedly, he actually said that at one point, an interesting proxy for his to test the one-way speed of light that he has, because his idea is light travels instantaneously towards us and at 2c away from us. Now, ignoring the reason that there's no reason at all to think that there's some weird isotropy in the speed of light like that.
How does the light know which direction it's going? Right. And wouldn't that alter the E = mc squared thing?
It would not, actually. It would the math ends up working out perfectly. But the problem is that it requires a huge violation of Occam's razor. But then again, Occam's razor is just a guideline. But apparently, and like I said, I'm trying to figure out exactly where he said this. I'm trying to look into it. But apparently, he actually said that a reasonable proxy to test the one-way speed of light would to test whether or not galaxies at great distances look the same as nearby galaxies. But the thing is, they don't. The farther away you get, the older galaxies look, as predicted by the isotropous speed of light. So we do actually have a proxy. We can't directly measure the one-way speed of light, but we have a proxy by looking at astronomical distances and seeing that very distant galaxies look like our predictions of very young galaxies. For instance, they're more likely to have active nuclei. They're less likely to have well-defined spirals. What spirals they do have tend to be differently shaped as predicted. All of these things. They're more likely to have a lot of high-mass stars.
Another one would be, how long does it take for galaxies to collide?
Yeah. Also, wouldn't all the light coming to Earth have to mean that they believe in a geocentricity or something? The Earth is the center of everything?
I think Hovind does.
Well, he's a heliocentrist. He thinks the solar system, or maybe the galaxy. Maybe he's a Milky Way centrist.
Well, I think he put the throne of God over in Vega or somewhere. I can't remember where he decided that would be. I mean, he's way too literal for its own good.
Well, one thing that's interesting is Nephilim Free has shifted from an explicit
saying that.
Oh, okay. One interesting thing was watching Nephilim Free go from being a legitimate geocentrist, where the entire universe rotates around Earth specifically, to being sort of a heliocentrist / Milky Way centrist, where he thinks that rather than the whole universe revolving around the Milky Way, that there are these quantized redshifts, which was an actual hypothesis that was, I think, in the 80s, where there was this data.
I think his main problem is he's a Nephilim centrist.
Well, yeah. But so there was actually a period in time where the latest data on redshifts actually did seem to indicate that there were these, like, not completely quantized, but there were these like shells of galaxies emanating from around the Milky Way that were receding, which indicated the Milky Way could have been the center. But as it turns out, that was simply a sampling error, and further samples have completely erased any sense of quantization. But you still get it occasionally in sort of like low-level creationism like Nephilim Free. But that's still a step up from Kent Hovind, who is just like, I don't think we can even measure these distances.
Years ago, it must be true, because nothing ever changes in science.
Yeah. Oh, and
by the way, that's another important issue, is that although you get paradigm changes in the way we approach data, the one thing that don't go away are the data. So objects fall, so that even though our understanding of falling objects is different in an Einsteinian frame than in a Newtonian one, or a non-Newtonian one before that, hammers would have fallen exactly the same way for Aristotle as now. None of the data of falling hammers changes. It's our interpretation of it. The problem is the creationist is leaving out big swaths of the data field and trying to end run their argument by just parsing it down. And if we trim it off, we go, no, yeah, that looks the way we want it to. Yeah, you can't get rid of all the data field that way. We can't take you seriously if you are doing that.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the things that I pointed out in my my academic fraud defined video that I released, I think last Thursday, where I was like, look, the people who obviously deal with the full data set are not the creationists.
Yeah.
And, and also the people who offer corrections are generally not the creationists. A number of my videos, the pinned comment is me correcting errors, and even just minor ones. Like at one point in, I think, one or two of my videos, I have a pinned comment saying, hey, I said foramen, I meant fenestra. Like, no one cares.
To err is human. To correct requires sound method.
Right. But the thing is, like, who really cares if I said foramen versus fenestra? You know what? Yeah. I do. Because one of them is wrong. And if I get it wrong and it comes to light, I want to correct it so people know that I'm being honest. And I have more
skin off the thing. You just go... I can make a statement and go, oops, wait a minute. I was making a joke about a science fiction thread that was going on there. And I said Klaatu Barada Nikto, and it was about Forbidden Planet. And I immediately realized, wait a minute, no, that's Day the Earth Stood Still. And corrected on it. Well, that's what you do on even the trivial things. And if somebody takes umbrage at the idea of correcting something or being corrected, well, excuse me, you need to go into another line of area, because truth is never going to be your friend.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that really bugs me is just, and it came up in that video, and things like stealth edits of videos, or just pretending that you never said something, or pretending that after admitting that something was wrong that you never thought it was wrong and now you're going to say it's right again. And this stuff, I'm not going to say that it doesn't occur in the mainstream scientific community, because it does, but when it's brought to light, the people who do that are just ostracized, and they're not accepted. It can be a career ruiner to do something like this.
And the same thing occurs in history, in any discipline where you have that precision, that there are some standards of primary evidence, that the requirement in legal facilities and others, that there are lines you just don't cross. You can't get a rigorous discourse if you're not doing that. And so that's why I've never been intimidated by science fields or anything else, because it's all the same set of rules. Scholarly methods is the same thing for everybody, and everybody gets to play, and everybody needs to play by those rigorous rules. And if you don't use them, the thing is that the people who can believe twaddle, their brains just are bad at those things. And it shows in their work that they can easily slide around error, and they just dig in their heels on nitpicking stuff. And at that point, you realize life is too short. Let's move on.
Yeah. Also, I want to address this Creo debunk thing real quick. So yeah, there is an apologist, a creation apologetic, that's like everything at the beginning of the universe was in like a white hole essentially, and that in the white hole, because of this it being a singularity, time essentially does not progress. And then as everything spreads out, time starts progressing for it, and then Earth was the last thing to emerge from the white hole, and that's why the universe is effectively 14.5 billion years old, but the Earth is only 6,000 years old. And look, it is utter nonsense. And I actually, my 1,000 subscriber special, we did a thing about that. And it was me, Bent Hovind, and Cheshire Vic, if I remember correctly. There might have been another person. I think Duke Ellington might have been there, who you probably don't know about, but he's on my Star Trek Adventures game on Saturdays. So check him out there. But anyway,
I think I know the rationale of why that's attractive to some, and that's I think Hank Hanegraaff falls into this, where he's a young Earth but old universe guy, and that's because so many of those anthropic fine-tuning things are dependent on the standard physics that has the universe old.
Right. If the universe isn't old, then it doesn't matter. God
is that where they came up? That movie, that Interstellar movie, it was where they were on space. They went to that planet, and then they ate the people up on the space station. Aged like 10 years, where they were only there for like 10 minutes.
Are you?
They make fun science fiction episodes. Time dilation and the bit that you get into, because time travels differently. Technically speaking, everybody can experience time dilation. Just run around your room real fast. It's not a lot of time dilation, but technically speaking, you're slightly younger than anybody that didn't move around that fast.
True. Yeah. It's nonsense on multiple levels. And in that video that I did for my 1,000 subscriber special, all of us were just like, this has got to be one of the stupidest things that any of us has heard. Like, this makes no sense at all. It's one of those extremely
Creo just asked a question like, whoa, we're going to solve that. What is your most plausible abiogenesis scenario? I see it as an interaction between basal RNA and DNA fragments and proteins moving along in a metabolic cycle that eventually gets encapsulated in membranes. And it's probably a training wheel living system that's unlike a lot of the stuff that we see in the last universal common ancestor, which was the one that eventually won out in the Darwinian selection parade over the first 100 million years of life. Does that answer the question?
For me, I think it's some combination of metabolism first, along with RNA world. So I think that there's probably some, perhaps as slightly separate entities. We've got metabolizing hypercycle-like entities, and also RNA, which can, autocatalyze its own formation as well as the formation of proteins. And then at some point, the RNA gets encapsulated in these metabolizing hypercycles forming
Now,
a
to be
genetic
fair,
material for them.
we should not rule out the major alternative, which is that the noodly appendages came down upon them, and there was the tomato sauce, and there was the garlic, and there was the meatball, and it was good, and it was tasty.
Oh, and Creo also asked, do you see a problem that the membrane must have a transmembrane protein? Your spelling's a little off, so it's throwing me. Sorry, and I realize I think
these are hypnotized membranes.
Yeah, I think Creo's native language is German, and so I think some of that spelling is coming through.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's actually, I don't think it's a problem, because if you look at hypercycles, which are essentially non-biotic metabolizing structures that have a lipid bilayer membrane, they actually don't need that. They would be more efficient if they had it, but not having it doesn't prevent them from having a metabolism. Things can still get through the membrane. It's not very efficient.
There's a mounting literature looking at the pieces that make up membrane proteins and the dynamics of what they do in a pre-context. That they're just it's an immensely intricate task to do, and it involves a whole bunch of stuff as to how you can trim it down to make it explicable. But yeah, that's it's probably not as big of a problem as you would think, because you've got these components that are ion exchanges of stuff that are occurring in an environment before it really settles into the cellular framework that we're used to in that last universal common ancestor thing. Oh, it's Salvador Cordova who presents it as a problem.
Oh, goodness.
Salvador presents almost everything as a problem, and he understands even less.
But I want to point out that I was right. Creo is in fact German. I could tell just based on his spelling. Oh, good. That means that my linguistic chops remain intact.
Cretaceous spelled with a K.
Yeah, the KPG. Yeah. It's because the same thing is true with EKG, electrocardiogram. But so the same thing with EKG, which is electrocardiogram, because cardiogram in English would be spelled with a C, but in German it's spelled with a K, and it was the EKG machine was invented in Germany, so there you go.
My favorite
German
word is psychiatry, which is not a German word, but they pronounce it. They just took the word over. But in German, the PS is pronounced. So it's Psychiatrie.
Nice. I want to say, so Zemor42 one day discovered my channel, and next thing I know, I think it's he, but I don't actually know. Sorry if it's not. But let me know. But he then went on and watched and commented and liked every single one of my videos in the course of a month, and I was just blown away. I was like, how are you even possibly doing this? This is amazing to me. I'm no complaints, but my goodness, thank you.
At least I've noticed recently, but a lot of us had a lot more free time than we had before because we can't go anywhere.
That's true. I suppose quarantine helps with that, discovering a new YouTube content. But no, Zemor42, he showed up on my channel, and now he's one of my favorite followers because, my goodness, he is a prolific commenter, and I love it, and he always has good stuff to say. So yeah.
Yeah. So, never be thrown off by a question, even a loaded one. Only be disturbed by people who don't have good answers.
So
yeah.
Speaking of going to, what's your guys' favorite or least favorite debate that you personally have had?
I would say, okay, so my favorite in terms of I had fun doing it and afterwards and whatnot has to be the Kent Hovind debate. Now, least favorite. So there was, I think my least favorite is a debate I had with someone who I did not know at the time, but it was a kid. And when I set up the debate, I assumed, which is not something I continue to do, but I assumed that this person was, an actual adult. Because even though a creationist, they were asking reasonably good questions in chat and whatnot. And so I set up this debate. And the debate was, is there support for evolution in the fossil record? And I gave my spiel. And then he just didn't have a follow-up for his opening. Because I brought up all sorts of stuff. He was like, I thought we were going to talk about synapsids. I'm like, okay, you can still talk about that in your opening. Why do you think synapsids aren't good evidence? And he just didn't say anything. And so I actually took it down for my channel for quite a while until it would no longer be something that people would see when they click on my channel. Basically, until it was buried deep in my video history. I did eventually bring it back just because, it's content and it's not. I just didn't want it to be the first thing that people saw was me essentially picking on some kid. And I really wasn't picking. I was trying to help out. Like, hey, you can ask questions, please. And that was rough. And that's one of the reasons why I have become much, much more careful about who I bring on, because I'm not here to pick on some kid. That's not my goal. And I would
wager a kid in the creationist framework online who's bringing up the synapsids, I would wager the odds are high that they had been drawing off of that Woodmarap article at Answers in Genesis because that would be the go-to thing. And that probably had inspired him. And then he never quite got around to it. For me, the favorite was clearly Kent Hovind because I had been wanting to debate Kent Hovind for a long time. And when it finally came up as an opportunity, wild horses couldn't have prevented me from wanting to get at my whack. And I felt that I handled myself with aplomb and finesse on it, and that I acquitted myself quite nicely on it. For discomfort, probably it's a toss-up between Nephilim Free and Mr. Batman because they're just presuppositional annoying people. Nephilim is a little more frustrating, frankly. I was kind of enjoying my thing with Mr. Batman because I was just holding the camera up thing with the timer going off. Oh, yeah, because he was just blithering on and I was going, waiting for him to finish his spiel where he was repeating the same thing.
Can I talk, please? Can I talk, please?
I was actually having fun with it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then Nephilim Nephilim is a Dwayne Gish Gallup person who is pompous and he dribbles stuff that he doesn't entirely understand, but he does it at speed. So there's an annoying factor about him that's very frustrating. Whereas Mr. Batman was just floating off into the distance. And so I was kind of actually enjoying waiting for me to get a word in.
Here's one thing I will say about Gish. By most accounts, he was reasonably personable and polite.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
Not something we can say for Nephilim Free or Mr. Batman. No. They are rude jerks. And the thing is, sometimes the people they're debating are also rude jerks. And you know what? Sometimes, okay, you give what you get. Fair enough. I get it. But like, I'm not a rude jerk. I am polite to a fault. I have people complain about me being too nice. Really, I am. I have people complain to me about you are too nice to these creationists. I'm like, I'm sorry.
The same can be said about Erica Gutzit-Gibbon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I've had people like, oh, Dapper Dan was way too nice to Mr. Batman. I'm just like, sure. But it bugs the heck out of me because it's like, you get Nephilim Free, and he is so arrogant despite being so unbelievably moronic. Yeah, and it's like, how can you know this little and be this?
He should never be certain with. And that puts him in a different category. There's a triage level that I look at it from a source methods point of view. And you don't really bump into many of the higher echelon creationists, either on the intelligent design side or the young earth creationist side, because they don't really do dates and they don't do engaging at that level. You have to come down the pecking order quite a ways before you start bumping into ones that will do the grunt work. And then Dwayne Gish probably would be one that would be classified up there because he's a detail fiddler, as opposed to the kind of debaters that are secondary parasite types. Dwayne Gish would do his own research. He was scavenging around on his own in a way that Kent Hovind, no, he's just copying stuff down from Walt Brown and from websites and all this kind of stuff. So underneath the Dwayne Gish level of detail fiddler, You've got your Kent Hovind bottom feeder types who are slavishly copying the material. Standing for Truth falls into that area. A little bit below that is your Nephilim free types, because they're still bottom feeding copying, but they copy badly. They misunderstand what it is they're copying at a level that you're not seeing for a Standing for Truth or even at a Kent Hovind level. And then below that are your Mr. Batmans that are just a pile of vapor, and there's nothing there to deal with.
Well, I think the reason that happens so much is that from the standpoint of like most... Okay, let me back up a little bit. The target audience for young Earth creationists is not non-Christians. They are an entirely inward-facing thing. No one is being convinced to become Christian because of young Earth creationism. Some people are being convinced to become Christians and then later becoming young Earth creationists as a result of having previously been convinced by something else to become Christians. But the idea that you're fighting the fight against the secular worldview and you're bringing Christ to the masses through your young Earth creation, no. I'm not, I mean, is it no one literally? Okay, there are probably some people who are already very ignorant of science who are convinced, but by and large, all of this material is inward facing. And the thing is, if it's inward facing, it doesn't matter that much if you're checking primary sources or secondary sources or just making it up. If it sounds good to the masses who don't care, they just want to have their preconceived notions reinforced.
In the Christian apologetic preaching tradition is one where parasitism is okay. Martin Luther King would pirate stuff from people's speeches and no one would bat an eyelash about it. It's just part of the tradition. And then a somewhat more insidious side is the idea
Martin Luther King
that
or Martin Luther?
Martin Luther King Jr.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, the I Have a Dream Martin Luther King. There was a wonderful analysis.
Bit of plagiarism there,
this, huh? It's part of that Bible tradition of how preachers deal with a good line. They just go ahead with it. And the idea that you need to attribute it is not something that plays a great role in the tradition. But then there's also the insidious type that you find where they will be okay to lie in order to get at the important truth. To misrepresent is okay if you're getting them to the right area. And there's an aspect of creationism that falls into that category. I think Andrew Snelling, to some extent, is operating there. There was a tactical manipulativeness that was happening with Philip Johnson and others that I find very distasteful, because at that point you're in an entirely different ballpark to where you're wanting to get them to the right answer, and it doesn't matter how you get them to do it. And to some extent, spiritualists, some spiritualists were just overt frauds, but there were others that said, okay, I'm doing a little trick with this table turning here, but it's for the important cause of bringing them to the spiritualism thing. And there's that same dynamic that's happening there.
Two things real fast I want to bring up that Dapper talked about too. One, the being nice thing to your debater things, which reminds me of something I think it was Paul Gia said on his channel. He tries not to cuss or anything like that on his channel. So because I think he said that once you go mean or something, they can stop listening to yell. He's just yelling now. No point.
Well, plus he's by nature amiable and mellow. So
well. Okay,
I'm an arrogant bastard, and if confronted with a Nephilim type, I have lost my temper with Nephilim and almost did with Mr. Batman. He was so
here's the thing. I have a similar stance when it comes to meanness and profanity on my channel to Paulogia, which is to say, I don't want anyone to come to my channel and reject what I'm saying because of the manner in which I say it. And while I know that it's not fair that people would do that, I also know that people will do that. And this goes back in my sort of life story to being a kid growing up with a Boston accent and realizing that people didn't take that accent seriously. And so right now, you can't hear a hint of Boston accent in almost anything I say. But that's because I spent years getting rid of it and realizing while I was doing so that it wasn't fair. My accent had nothing to do with how smart I was or how accurate I was being or whether I was right or wrong, but it didn't matter because people didn't perceive it as an accent used by intelligent people. So I got rid of it. And similarly, there's a group of people who I would like to be able to reach, namely actual creationists, who, if I go around dropping lots of F-bombs and cursing all the time and being mean, will tune me out simply because of my style. And you know what? It's not fair, but it doesn't matter. Life isn't fair. And that is why I do that. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean that there isn't value in having the more aggressive or vitriolic or even vulgar groups. Because there are also some people who respond to that strength and forceful rhetoric. And I would like both groups to be reached. But I realize that that is not my strength. I'm not a good cursor. I'm not naturally very good at being arrogant. If anything, I'm humbler than I should be, which a number of people tell me, but I never believe them, except so many people have told me it. Maybe it's true. I don't know.
It takes a lot and very specific things to get me to like really angry.
Yeah, but that's one of the reasons why I think it's nice that there's a variety of people. So like, for instance, Paulogia and I can be the more polite and maybe demure or
he's the Ron Howard
humble
of creation, anti-creation apologetics.
Right. Whereas RJ can be a little bit more hard-edged and a little bit more combative. And then we can go to Aaron.
Richard Dawkins.
Yeah, then we can get to like Aaron Ra or Richard Dawkins or something. And they're much more combative.
You're a fucking idiot.
Right. So I think there's value in having the full spectrum.
Idiot.
So yeah, like I said, I think there's reason to have that spectrum there because different people need to be reached in different ways. And if I can reach the people who would be turned off by those things, great. If say RJ can reach the people who are a bit in the middle, amazing. If say Aaron can reach some of the people who are most convinced by people being, forceful and really coming out of the gate with our,
there never has been. Different people react in different ways. The one thing that I do always as the universal is the source issue, which is if you're making a claim and somebody challenges you to document it, you should be able to do it. And an inability to come up with that is a dead giveaway. You got a problem.
Yeah, and also I just want to say, Maya says, consider the venue. A lot of people just want to see a dumpster fire. You can reach more people with being cordial/professional. In a lot of cases, that's true. But also, I want to say, Maya Atkinson has been one of my most long-standing supporters on my channel, and she is amazing. Thank you so much, Maya, for being such a big part of my channel since basically the very beginning. I don't know how you even found me. It's just amazing to me. And that's one of the things that I love about doing this stuff on YouTube is there are so many people who just somehow stumble across my content and they become avid viewers and supporters. And it is strange to me to have people who I can say, it's amazing.
I still know. I found you because I was interviewing Eric Verhauer. He says, "Can I bring the moderator?" And I'm like, "Sure."
Oh yeah, Eric Vierthaler is great. He's actually the first and so far only person that I've met from doing YouTube that I've met in person. He and I went to see the Victoria T-Rex specimen in when it was in Arizona. I guess it's still here for a little bit, but he was visiting some family down in Arizona, and I went and hung out with them and him. We went to see the T-Rex specimen. And it was a lot of fun. I had a really good time. Yeah. And but I would love to meet a lot of other people. I've been trying to coordinate meeting other people, but 2020 is kind of a dick and it's ruining all those plans. So
yeah, the other thing
here would be a long-term plan. The idea that if and when the Ark Encounter ever goes bankrupt, that a network of GoFundMe anti-creationists would buy it and turn it into a museum criticizing creationism. Just
that would be amazing. I would love that.
That would be spectacular, wouldn't it?
Another thing you brought up is about you debating that kid thing. I made a post about on Facebook recently that I'm trying to fight against too is they try to start them young.
Yeah. Well, actually, okay. Coming back to Maya, guess who was my moderator for that debate?
Maya?
Yep.
Nobody.
Mhm. Yeah, Maya's been on my channel. She was awesome, actually, and she was so nice to him. I was thank you, Maya.
Well,
Thank
there's
you.
a level in which you have a kid that they've soaked up information in their frame. A creationist is defending the truth with the capital T, and the idea that they could be coming in, that there's an important, it validates them in terms of their elders and their connections. There would be an enormous incentive on this area. The problem is, if you're really young, I look back on what little I knew when I was 18, and if you're even younger, it's even worse. And you can be ones where you might regret the kinds of stuff because you just didn't have the experience and knowledge and method to be able to come at a legitimate thing. So you can't feel too cruel on people that are just coming up from an environment where, from their standpoint, they're just purveying things that are absolutely certain to them. They just don't realize that it isn't.
Because they trust the people telling them that they're my parents or they're whatever. They think they won't lie to me.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So, guys, we've been going almost 2 hours, and I'm going to have to get going pretty soon.
All right.
So,
okay. So, all right. So let's wrap this up. Any last words you want to say about this before we go?
I think we beat a lot of dead horses.
Okay.
And I want to say thank you to Meyer for that. I still feel pretty bad about that debate either way. But I will say, if anyone here is watching, tomorrow should be Eric with Erica. I did get last minute confirmation from Erica. She's been a little bit hard to reach in the last couple of days, but Eric with Erica should be a go. I did invite Cheshire Vic to be on my stream tomorrow. I don't know if she's going to join, so maybe. Which I think would actually be my first Eric with Erica guest appearance of anyone. So that'll be that. Thursday is going to be my starting a new series. Saturday, hopefully, will be a game review where I'm going to review 2 games on my channel. It's Dapper Dino, not the coding one, the one with the anti-creationist stuff. And yeah, that sums out me. And come check out my channel if you like counter creationism.
RJ, anything coming up your channel?
And everybody in the network of YouTube and Zoom, the way we have now, Walker did a wonderful debate, and a bunch of us had helped him prep all of that make use of all the tools people have available. Don't think that you have to do it alone, that you want to actively seek out a network of people that can help you prepare and up the game, because in strength, there's numbers. In numbers, there is strength in the ability to pull information together and speed up the process. Because if you're trying to depend entirely on you learning everything about everything before you can do this, oh boy, that's time consuming. Build off of everybody else.
Yeah, my previous series that I did, I relied heavily on Corporal Anon, and then I got a whole bunch of help from Vice Rhino, who provided me with his data analysis that was just invaluable. So yeah, don't go it alone.
Vice Rhino stuff that he did on Chadwick's.
That's what I used.
Either Vice Rhino, just absolutely spectacular material, which I confirmed when I looked at the main spreadsheet myself. So I could find out Chadwick is the one that was putting all these silly little arrows to try to argue that the flood was. They could literally see in the rocks the floods coming in and then draining back out. No, you aren't.
Yeah. That's exactly what I drew on, was Vice Rhino's analysis of that, backed up by me double checking not every data point, but sort of checking the sort of general trend of the data points.
And that's what everybody can do. That look just what we did here. We don't take anybody's word for it. You don't need to take anybody's word for it. You shouldn't take anybody's word for it.
Yeah.
That you should be able to test out by looking at the material yourself, and there's that ring of truth where, yes, this is solid.
Well, all right. Well, thank you everyone very much.
Well, if you check out the links in the description below, if you haven't subscribed to them yet, of course, I'm pretty sure, and no one here in the chat has subscribed to these 2 by now. But if you haven't, do that. and click their bell if you haven't either. Anyways, as I always say, never stop
Buy
learning.
my book.
That too.
Behind me, like, to